Hello and welcome to today's Delta Credit Tip. So today we're talking about that debt collection letter you got in the mail the other day. What do you do? How do you handle it? And most importantly, what do you need to look for in that letter? Well, stay tuned. We'll tell you what on today's Delta Credit Tip. Hello, welcome back to today's Delta Credit Tip. So if this is your first time watching one of our videos, thank you very much. But recognize that we come out with a new video every week to help you in your credit restoration process straight from the experts at Delta Credit Restoration. So if this information is helpful, give us a thumbs up, subscribe below, hit the bell so that you're notified and you can get this information as soon as it comes out so you can apply it to your credit restoration process. And if you happen to know someone else trying to fix their credit, share it with them. That's the whole point of the video, right? So that we can empower our friends, empower our families to help them make a choice to make a change here with Delta. So let's take a look at that collection letter that you got in the mail the other day. So the first thing I want to mention is that what you don't want to do is ignore it, okay? Ignoring a collection letter is never a good idea, okay? You want to respond promptly and you want to respond appropriately to each and every notification that you get in the mail. So do not turn yourself into an ostrich. Do not bury your head in the sand. This is not the time for inaction. This is a time to be proactive and deal with these debt collectors head on. So let's talk about that letter. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do when you get that letter is look at the outside of the letter. Okay, make sure that there's nothing on that envelope that indicates that it is from a debt collector. That is against the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. There can't, your neighbor and your mailman and whoever's collecting your mail for you should not be able to see debt collector written across the front of the envelope. Okay, so we want to make sure that it's a very confidential and discreet letter that you're getting. Okay, now as far as the content of that letter, okay, the general content, you want to also make sure that there is no violation of your privacy in the content of the letter. So let's say it's a collection for a medical bill. We don't need the fact that you got a penicillin shot in that letter, right? Because now that debt collector knows you got issues, right? So certain medical information cannot be included in the information that the debt collector is given. Otherwise, there are what they call HIPAA law violations where your medical information is being disclosed without the appropriate authority to get that kind of information. All right. Also, things like your social security number should not be in full in that credit in that dunning letter that you got from that debt collector, because again, we don't need all that kind of information just floating out there. Okay, but that's just general stuff. Those are rarely going to be violations that you see. It's not usually until you start validating debt that you start getting those HIPAA violations and whatnot. But rarely do debt collectors, they're not that stupid to where they're going to make that kind of mistake, right? But let's look a little bit deeper into the letter, okay? So the first thing, or the next thing I should say that you really want to pay attention to is the date. Some debt collectors won't even date the letter, right? Because they understand the issues they could create for themselves. The date of that letter is important because it taps into a variety of different disclosure laws that you are entitled to as a consumer, okay? The first of which is the 30 days, right? So whenever you get a letter, it should start off by saying, if you dispute any part of this letter, you have 30 days in which to, dispute this item. Otherwise, we're going to assume that the debt is valid, right? Something along those lines. And that is true, okay? If you delay in your response, the way the Fair Credit Reporting Act is listed is that you do tend to lose some of your immediate rights to ask for validation. But don't let them use that as a defense against providing you accurate information to better identify the account or validate the account or prove the obligation, however you want to describe that process. Okay. There are other laws in place, like the 609 and the 611 stuff that you hear a lot on the internet. A lot of times that is kind of compartmentalized within the first 30 days. But there's other laws like 623 and others that extend that time. Okay, so don't get caught in the idea that if you go past the 30 days, that all your rights are now, taken from you. That's not necessarily true. What it does do is it creates obstacles that you're going to have at least the wherewithal to be able to overcome. So it just makes it more complicated. So again, as soon as you get a dunning letter or a collection letter from a collection agency, you want to address it immediately. Okay? Now, the other thing about that date is that a debt collector with the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act must notify you in writing 5 days after the initial communication with you. So if they've put it on the credit report or they've tried to call you, 5 days from that date, they must send you something in writing. So if that date has exceeded that amount of time, well, now there's a violation there. Now, will this violation get it off your credit report? Probably not. Does it give you leverage in how it can be handled? Yes, it might be able to get it off the credit report. It might not, but it does definitely give you some leverage in that process. Okay, so make sure that date is on there and pay attention to that date. The next thing you want to look for, the third thing you want to look for is who is being represented in the letter. Okay, and the reason why this is important is because sometimes the company that is soliciting funds from you isn't the only one involved. A lot of times there may be a debt buyer who, although is still defined by the opinions of the court as a debt collector, they employ what we call a hardcore debt collector, where that's all they do is simply collect the debt. And what will happen is that these accounts are assigned from the debt buyer to the debt collector. So if you get that debt collector in a pickle and they have to delete the account, well, the account is just assigned to them and it's in a temporary contract. That account's going to go back to the debt buyer, and that debt buyer is going to try to reassign it to a different debt collector. Now you're chasing that debt, one debt collector after the next, and your credit score is doing one of these kind of, roller coaster rides as you jump from one debt collector to the next. By recognizing if there is a parent company or a debt buyer, it gives you the opportunity to then address all parties involved to prevent that chain reaction from happening time and time again. Okay. Also, you want to pay attention to who the original creditor is. They should notate in that letter who the original creditor is. It'd be kind of silly for them not to, but it kind of adds a little bit of clarity as to what they're actually trying to collect for. It also bleeds into, well, when did you have the relationship? And that could lead to other things that you want to look for in the letter, which we'll get to in just a second. Okay. The next thing you want to look for are threats. Okay. If they are threatening to sue you in that letter and it's a non-attorney, okay, you want to take that threat very seriously, but you also want to test the ability of that debt collector to follow through with that threat. It is illegal for a debt collector to tell you that they are going to sue you if they cannot sue you. Okay? And so if there is any verbiage in that letter that states, hey, we're going to take you to court kind of thing, you want to make sure you make note of that, because if you find out that they don't have the capacity to do that, then there's another violation there. Okay? The last thing you might want to really look for in a collection letter is a disclosure. And it's usually at the very bottom or on the back. And that says something along the lines of, the law limits how long you could be sued for a debt due to the amount of time this debt has been around, whatever. We're not going to take you to court. And sometimes it'll even say, we're not going to report it. If you look for that disclosure, that means that the debt that they're trying to solicit from you has exceeded the statutes of limitations. It means that you legally do not owe that money anymore. Okay? So if you don't legally owe it, and if they aren't going to report it, well, that might change how you address it. Okay? Now, if the debt that they're trying to solicit from you has exceeded statutes of limitations and they haven't disclosed that in the letter, well, again, another violation. Okay? So make sure you're looking for that disclosure because one, you can seek a violation on the part of the debt collector, and two, it also gives you the opportunity to change how you manage handling that account. Because if you don't legally owe it, then you may not be so inclined to pay it, even if they can prove the debt was at one point in time your legal liability. So make sure that when you get these letters, you're reading them, you're opening them, you're addressing them, even if you don't have the capacity to pay them. Even if you know the debt isn't valid debt, you still need to make sure that you're reading your mail. Again, for us at Delta Credit Restoration, right, it's not the score that matters, it's the behavior that leads to the score. And the number one behavior that we look for is that you're simply cognizant of what's going on around you financially. You got to read their statements, you got to read the letters, you got to read the disclosures, you got to read the terms and agreement, you got to be cognizant, you got to know what's going on. Okay? So when you get these debt collection letters, check for privacy issues, check for the date, check to see who's actually sending you the letter and who's trying to collect the debt, look for threats, and look for the disclosures within the letter so that you're educated about what you want to do next. Okay, so I hope this information helps. Again, thumbs up, subscribe to below, hit the bell, share with the world. And this is how we make a choice, make a change. Delta.